The man's deep voice reached his ears. Liuruyan was confused. She felt that this person was very defensive. How could he think that he was a gangster when he met an innocent young man who came downstairs to get spicy hot pot in the middle of the night? Frowning her brows, the girl puffed up her cheeks and was about to open her mouth to retort. Her eyes glanced at the oil stains on the man's clothes that were particularly shiny under the street lights. She felt guilty and swallowed the words with a narrowed mouth. "I'm sorry." She apologized in a low voice. After thinking about it, she straightened her back and said seriously, "I'm sorry for staining your clothes. I will compensate you, but you can't call me a gangster, that's rude, because I didn't play gangster to you." Hearing this, the man's eyes darkened and he asked with unclear meaning, "Really?" Liuruyan raised his head when he heard this tone, with a confused expression on his face. The man saw this and his voice turned cold unconsciously. "What are you looking at? Do you remember it?" Liuruyan, she raised her head and belatedly began to look at the person in front of her. The man was tall and thin, wearing sunglasses and a mask on his face, but he still looked like a handsome guy. She squinted her eyes and looked at it for a while. The more she looked, the more familiar it became. An unlikely idea gradually came to her mind. Her eyes widened. "Are you?" Ji Boda took off his sunglasses expressionlessly. "Ah!" Liuruyan exclaimed, "It's really you." The man snorted coldly. "Why are you here too?" The girl didn't care about his cold expression at all and asked in surprise, "Are you here to participate in the competition too?" She couldn't help but jump up. Ji Boda was stunned for a moment, his eyes glanced at her tiptoes, and he slowly bent down to look at her level, looked at her, and raised his eyebrows. "Participate? Is not it?" The man was quiet for a few seconds, keeping his posture of bending over to look at her, and suddenly smiled meaningfully. "Yes." He didn't smile that well. Liuruyan looked at his smile and instinctively felt something was wrong. Unfortunately, before she could think about it, the man had already straightened up, lowered his eyes, and made a peaceful and friendly handshake gesture. "Please tell me." Liuruyan looked at the hand stretched out in front of her, took it blankly, and was held by the man and shook it twice. The man's fingers had distinct joints, and Liuruyan looked a little dazed. Ji Boda let go of his hand, put on his sunglasses again, and stepped forward with his long legs lightly. "Let's go." "Where to go?" "Go back to the dormitory." The man looked back at her, unable to see clearly the expression in his eyes, because he was wearing sunglasses. "Your spicy soup is going to spill all." Before the man finished speaking, Liuruyan said, "Ah," belatedly, and then she remembered that she was still holding malatang in her hand. She raised the bag in her hand and looked at the little soup left in the bag. She grimaced and took a particularly regretful look at the soup that had been spilled on the man. What a waste. Liuruyan wanted to cry but had no tears. Bai had been busy for so long, but her Lonko fan still hadn't eaten well. Lowering his arms listlessly, Liuruyan slowly moved to Ji Boda, looked up at him wiltingly. "Let's go." Ji Boda, he suddenly felt very magical. The little girl in front of her transformed from a surprise popping candy into a frosted eggplant in less than 2 minutes. Sun Wukong is not as fast as her. The two of them walked up a flight of stairs and naturally turned to the elevator door. The moment they saw the elevator, they were stunned. A sense of honeyed embarrassment quickly filled the air. What the two people did in the elevator 3 days ago is still vivid in my mind. Liuruyan looked at the elevator, then at him, and suddenly took a big step back. Ji Boda looked at her expressionlessly. Liuruyan avoided his sight, touched her ears guiltily, and explained, "What about that? Why don't we go separately?" "How?" "I'm afraid the elevator will break down." At this time, the elevator arrived, and with a ding, the door opened. The man walked in, pressed the door button, and looked at her leisurely. Liuruyan heard his cold voice, "I am not a magnetic force, and I have no special skills that can cause the elevator to malfunction." Liuruyan touched her nose embarrassedly, walked into the elevator silently despite the man's gaze, automatically stood up on tiptoes, and pressed the arrival button for the top floor. It was quiet all the way. Liuruyan stood a little behind Ji Boda, praying fearfully that nothing would happen to the elevator, while secretly scanning him with her eyes. The man had a good-looking profile, a tall nose, deep eye contours, and thin lips. Liuruyan stared at his lips, uncontrollably remembering how 3 days ago she pressed him against the elevator wall like a flower picker, and then pounced on him like a dog, biting those 2 lips fiercely. "The taste is very good." Liuruyan suddenly looked away, her eyelashes trembled twice, and her feet started to feel hot. In about a second, Liuruyan felt that her face was as hot as a kettle that had just boiled water and was smoking. He lowered his head and buried his chin in his collar, staring at his own feet motionlessly, his heart beating very fast. Finally hearing the ding sound of the elevator arriving at the floor, she looked up at the floor number, and then rushed out of the elevator as if she was saved. When he turned around, he found that the other party was following behind him. Liuruyan. Liuruyan, you live on this floor too? The man said. Then took out a key and successfully inserted it into the keyhole of the door on the left side of the two people. With a twist, there was a click and the door opened. The man turned around, keeping the posture of closing the door, and found her following her eyes. The face wearing sunglasses and mask still looked expressionless. Liuruyan laughed dryly. What a coincidence. It's a coincidence. Liuruyan touched her nose and turned to look at the door of her house. When the door opened and she walked in, she thought of something and suddenly leaned out half of her body to stop the door opposite that was about to be closed. What about that? The door stopped, and after a while, it was pushed out again. Liuruyan grinned silently, teasing a good family man with ill intentions. I've met several times, but you haven't told me your name. When are you going to tell me? There was silence for a few seconds. Before the door closed, Zhou heard two concise words from the man, tomorrow. The girl was so happy that she jumped up slightly, grabbed the opposite door and shouted at him a second before it was closed, okay, I'll wait for you. There was a clanging sound, and the door was closed. The girl turned her back, blushing and smiling like a sneaky cat under the confused gaze of her roommate from the room. The next day was the first game day. Liuruyan was pulled up by Ji early in the morning. He went to the bathroom to put on light makeup, and then came out to look at Ji's makeup artist in a daze. Only then did she realize belatedly that for the first competition, each company should have hired makeup artists to create the first impression for the artists of their own company, and she, a person who is not very good at makeup skills, spent 15 minutes alone in the bathroom before planning to go out for the talent show. Ji couldn't stand it and asked his makeup artist to give her a few touch-ups. Fortunately, she had a good foundation, light makeup, and good skin without any blemishes. Her face was white and tender. Ji couldn't help but poke her little cheeks with his fingers while watching her put on makeup. Liuruyan wanted to glare at her, but the makeup artist held her head and told her, don't move around when you're putting on eyeliner. Liuruyan felt really wrong. It was she who moved, my sister, not me. After the two of them put on makeup, handed over their mobile phones, and set out from the dormitory together, on the way to the recording room. Liuruyan finally remembered that the very handsome chief instructor that her sister had mentioned before. Liuruyan didn't care whether he was handsome or not. She just hoped that everyone could spend the period before the preliminary competition peacefully. The teacher could turn a blind eye when he saw that she didn't know how to make progress. After all, she was just here to make up for the numbers. She poked Ji's arm next to her. Do you know who our chief instructor is this time? Ji turned to look at her with a surprised look. I know, you don't know? Liuruyan shook her head. I just came back from abroad, and I don't know much about the domestic entertainment industry. Ji was silent for a few seconds for some reason, and then gave her a concise summary. My name is Ji Boda. He looks pretty good, but his temper is bad. Liuruyan thought, she has a bad temper. Just as he was about to ask this man why he had such a bad temper, he heard Ji next to him continue to say with a sympathetic face, a frigid older single man. Liuruyan, ? When the two arrived at the recording studio, almost all the contestants had arrived. After counting the number of people, the director loudly announced with a small loudspeaker that individuals or companies would come up to draw lots, and then enter the venue in order according to the numbers drawn. Liuruyan was lucky and got the first one in the lottery. The girl was wearing a white top, jeans, and a pair of half-high shoes. She walked onto the entrance passage under the eager eyes of everyone. There were many chairs in the venue. Liuruyan randomly picked a corner, sat down, and watched others enter the venue with nothing to do. Then she discovered that being the first to enter didn't seem to be a good thing. She had to stand up and bow and applaud every time someone came in. She probably only did this in elementary school. Now she had to think about how good the Chinese entertainment industry's etiquette education is now. Everyone should be given a red scarf to praise them. She really couldn't put a little red flower on her forehead anymore. When she stood up for about the 10th time, she secretly felt that the amount of exercise she had done today by standing up and sitting down had reached the standard, and she would probably be able to report it later. After the applause ended, she sat down, and after a few seconds, someone sat next to her, probably because the place she chose was too remote. By now most of the people had entered the venue, and this was the first person to sit next to her. Liuruyan glanced. The boy is good-looking, younger than her, and looks very boyish, still looks familiar. She glanced twice, and the boy next to her noticed it, turned his head, and narrowed his big eyes into crescent moons. We meet again. Liuruyan remembered him, the strong young man who helped her carry her luggage yesterday, so she smiled and said, "What a coincidence. Unfortunately, I saw you here, so I sat here." Just as Liuruyan was about to say something, someone new came in at the entrance of the passage. Liuruyan had to turn her face away, stood up again, bowed, applauded and sat down, until everyone has entered. Liuruyan was frowning secretly and thinking about why he hadn't seen the person from yesterday when the lights in the entire arena suddenly dimmed. There were discussions of a "hey, what's going on" all around, and the originally quiet venue suddenly became noisier, until a huge screen not far from them suddenly lit up, and the three dream chasers, a large Chinese character, jumped into the center of the screen. A strong male voice came into the arena from all directions. "Welcome, all artist friends, I am the chief director of this Dream Chaser audition. It is an honor to gather these outstanding new actors and actresses here. I believe that at this moment, you and like me, I am full of tension and expectation for the next 5 months. Dreamers, young people, let us work together, here, at this moment, to use our efforts and dreams to create miracles with our own hands. Let us become miracles." Now I announce that the Dream Chaser selection competition has officially begun. Let us welcome with warm applause Ji Boda, the chief instructor of this selection competition. Before the director finished speaking, the entire arena was already boiling. This name, at this moment, is like a stimulant for everyone. The picture on the large central screen cut to the entrance of the contestant tunnel. A tall and thin man gradually approached from the darkness in the distance, and his blurry face gradually became clear, until that almost perfect face was completely enlarged on the large central screen. Everyone gradually became quiet, their eyes fell on the person under the light, and they secretly clenched their fists to restrain their excitement. As4. Liuruyan, looking at the increasingly clear and familiar face on the big screen, her eyes slowly widened, her upper body leaned back hard, the chair legs slipped, and a sharp voice sounded in the quiet arena. It sounded suddenly and desperately.